Okay, welcome everybody to our Friday and final lecture. Um, I'm sure at this point, especially for our longtime CSI participants, Professor Coleman really needs no introduction. Nevertheless, I will attempt. Uh, Kathleen Coleman is the James Loeb Professor of Classics and Director of Undergraduate Studies at Harvard University, where she's been teaching since 1996. She has published scores of works, including commentaries on Statius Silvae Book 4 and Marshall's Liber Spectacularum, in addition to two forthcoming volumes on Roman spectacle in the arena and Roman public executions. Today, she will be speaking to us on identity and community in the gladiatorial barracks. Professor Coleman.
Thank you very much, Mark. I just need to share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, I can see it. It's fine.
Okay, I'm just trying to see if I can actually go back. Yeah, there we are. Okay, so Familia Gladiatoria, identity and community in the gladiatorial barracks. And it's wonderful to be back with CSI. I look forward to it every year. And let's hope that next year maybe we'll be in person, which would be lovely. But still, it's great to be doing it even on Zoom. So I have a question for you, which is, what do you think's going on here? This was only discovered about 20 years ago outside Leptis Magna, and it's part of a series of images on a very large floor, and the others are from other aspects of spectacle. And it's very striking because we almost never see a gladiator like the one on the left looking so almost catatonic, sitting there with what's obviously a prostrate, defeated, dead gladiator facing him. And those long blonde tresses are very striking. And it's generally thought, let me go to the next screen, that the person on the left with the long sword in his hand is a secutor, and that the gladiator lying there next to the shield is actually lying next to the secutor's shield, and his own trident and shoulder guard are depicted above him, and so he would be the retiarius, the net fighter. And I will come back to this later, but we have every reason to believe that normally the pairs who fought in the arena would be from the same barracks. So they would have lived together, trained together, fought together. And clearly that kind of hothouse atmosphere could generate tremendous antipathy. We all know how annoying it is to live with somebody else. Or it could generate tremendous friendships. And so when we're thinking about community and solidarity in the gladiatorial barracks, we're thinking about a very particular kind of social engagement, which really was potentially fatal. And that, of course, gives it a special edge. Having said that, I should emphasize to you that probably gladiators only fought in public a couple of times a year. So it wasn't as though every half hour they were, potentially exposing themselves to mortal combat. But even so, one has to ask oneself, how would it feel to be part of such a tightly knit, enclosed community? And I'll get to the archaeology of these spaces where they lived and practiced in a minute. How would it feel to live and work in that environment and know that you might mortally wound or be mortally wounded by one of the people that you knew so well? So really that is the question that I'm asking here. And we'll see whether we can get anywhere with the very, very limited resources at our disposal. Because as I'm sure you're aware, there are almost no literary sources for gladiatorial combat and the way gladiators lived. The upper crust authors who wrote our texts believed that the gladiatorial arena was below their notice. And so they don't notice it. But I am going to start with one literary text from a very unusual genre. And that is, it's an extract from the 9th major declamation ascribed to Quintilian. It's now believed that they're not by Quintilian, but as with the Psalms of David, the most famous exponent of a particular genre attracts the authorship of works in that genre. So these major declamations are ascribed to Quintilian, but are probably later than his time. And what I ought to do is explain the story very briefly of the 9th declamation. Let's hope I get this right. There's a rich man who has a mortal enemy who's a poor man, and they each have a son, but the sons are friends. And the rich man's son gets abducted and forced to train as a gladiator. So the poor man's son says that he will take the place of the rich man's son so long as the rich man's son agrees to look after the poor man's father to the end of it, the poor man, the father of the son, for the rest of his life. And so they swap, and the poor man's son is in the gladiatorial barracks. And then the rich man behaves badly, and so on and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing from our perspective is how the barracks are described. The atmosphere in the barracks is described by the author of the major declamation. And so the rich man is actually meditating about the gladiatorial experience in this extract. Or would a man with a mind like this return to a gladiator's cell? Would he undergo the training, diet, a coach, and finally the role of a criminal? For my sake you fought in the arena, for your own sake you died there. The poor man's son actually dies. Yet all these terrible marks of misfortune he took upon himself precisely so that he could relieve me of them. This man, neither a criminal nor a hard luck case, entered the arena. Gentlemen, when did you ever hear of such a thing? He became a gladiator because of his own goodness. And that is bonitate sua gladiator factus est. So you see that clearly there is this major prejudice against gladiatorial combat. It's something that the general public associates with criminals and low-life types of person. So Louis Sussman actually translated the major declamations, which is very helpful. And then there's a very good German commentary by Gernot Krappinger in a whole series that covers all the größere Deklamationen published in Casino. So if you're moved to look at these major declamations, that's one place to go. Now, let's look back. I was harbored with temple robbers, arsonists, and the only ones to have the same reputation as gladiators, murderers. And one has to take on board the fact that gladiators either were slaves or were assimilated to the status of slaves. So we're really looking at a slave household here. And Seneca's account of the gladiators' auctoramentum, that is to say, the gladiators' oath upon assuming the career, if you like, of a gladiator, is to put himself completely at the mercy of his owner trainer, to be branded, fettered, and killed with an iron weapon, so that there is no way in which a gladiator has any control over his own fate, if you like. That's really the essence of the auctoramentum. And therefore, these people both legally have no status and in the eyes of the public are people without any status. But of course, as we are seeing today with the feeling among the people in this community who are undocumented or are being stripped of their temporary protective status, etc., being, if you like, a pariah group really has a consolidating effect. And so and we see it, of course, in the World Cup as well, that the losing side has a tremendous sense of identity and sort of collaborative spirit. And so we would expect, I think, to see in the gladiatorial arena, well, in the barracks, this same kind of sort of very close identity. So let's move on. We have this further passage from the ninth declamation. From the beginning of the human race, loyalty, which in our own times has long since disappeared, has provided very few pairs of friends who are more to be admired. For the gladiatorial training school had not so bestialized me, nor had long practice in killing so hardened my sensibilities, that I could wish a friend to be killed who was able to die instead of me. The weapons stripped from my body are transferred to him, and although the armor doesn't fit properly, the newly designated pair is led in. And this is, of course, the rich man's son speaking about the fact that the poor man's son has taken his place in the gladiatorial barracks. And the emphasis on the pairing, I think, is really important, because that becomes a technical term in the arena. Gladiatoria paria, gladiatorial pairings, is one of the terms you meet over and over again in the epigraphy of the arena. So this idea that the pair forms an antagonistic pair who are collaborative at the same time. They're people who have trained together, and then they end up, in fact, fighting potentially against one another. And I have written about this. There's an article by me. If anybody wants to read it, I can obviously send it to you. But what I'm giving you now is a version of this article with the visual aspect that I couldn't give in that printed document. So let's move to a visual. And here is an aerial view of the theatre quarter in Pompeii, familiar, I'm sure, to most of you. So we see the large theatre there with the little Odeon on the right-hand side of it. And then in front of the large theatre, we have what was originally a porticus, just as we know that in Rome, behind the theatre of Pompey, there was a large porticus, which then Pompey planted with exotic plants that he'd brought back from the east and so forth. And that would be a kind of recreational area where the audience could walk in the interval and that kind of thing. And what we see here in this aerial photograph is a series of very small rooms backing onto the scaenae fronds of the theatre. I'm sure you can see that little row of rooms facing us there. And in the periphery of this peristyle were found, upon excavation, gladiatorial weapons, so that we believe that this is where gladiators were being quartered when the eruption took place, which is not to say that this was a permanent gladiatorial barracks, but it was being used as a gladiatorial barracks when the eruption occurred. Oh, sorry. I remember this happened.
Check out library materials. Please proceed to the circulation desk on the first floor.
I remember this happened last year. I'm sorry about it. It'll happen again at 5 o'clock when they close the library. But it gives me a chance to take a breath.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes. If you plan to charge out library materials, please proceed to the circulation desk on the first floor.
Okay, now we've got 15 minutes before that voice comes back. So in those rooms, we think gladiators were being accommodated. And so here you have a plan, and you can see that the small rooms surround 3 3/4 sides of this structure. And many years ago, I took a tape measure and measured those rooms, and they are 11 feet by 11 feet, which is the standard size for a Roman sort of cell, basically. And it's a moot point how many gladiators would have been accommodated in one of those rooms. At best, probably 2, and at worst, as many as 8. people who have worked on army barracks, which are the same size, have done very interesting diagrams showing how you could get 8 people to sleep in a space 11 by 11. While I was creeping around with my tape measure, somebody came past and said to me in Italian, "You looking for a room?" which I thought was rather sweet. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the enclosed space and the very cramped quarters where these people would have lived. So now I'm going to move to what's really the major source of information from which we can glean something about the communal sense of identity among gladiators, and that is, of course, epigraphy. And I'm going to use these abbreviations in my slides, so I'm sure that Mark would be able to circulate at least this page of the PowerPoint, if not the whole thing, afterwards, so that you can see where my information is coming from. For now, let's start in the Greek East. And indeed, most of my evidence does in fact come from the Greek East, because on the whole, epitaphs about gladiators in the Greek East tend to be more detailed than the ones from the Western provinces. And that's why we have so much Greek decorating the screen. So I'm starting by looking at this from the top down, if you like. So starting by looking at the personnel of the gladiatorial arena, specifically the umpires. And we have this interesting epitaph from Berea in Macedonia in memory of Publius. And you see his name in Greek is Publius. In memory of Publius, chief umpire, summa rudis, by the undersigned, Eclectus, chief umpire, Onesimus, assistant umpire, Achaicus, Classicus, Lucius, Fuficius, Restitutus, Chareus, Demetrius, Attictus, Peridio, Agato, Lucius Naevinus, Spatalus, herald, Eutychus, trumpeter. So we don't know who all the people between the assistant umpire and the herald and trumpeter were, but presumably they are other personnel attached to the arena. And therefore, we can see that the chief umpire is being commemorated by his fellow administrators, if we can call them that, in the gladiatorial arena. And it's quite possible that they paid into a burial society. And so the expenses for the epitaph would have been paid by that. That seems to have been the case with some of the gladiatorial epitaphs that survived from the ancient world. So I think we should probably imagine that there would have been an esprit de corps, if you like, among the administrators, the personnel of the arena, who maybe thought of themselves separately from the men who were training to be gladiators, because some of these people would probably not have been of servile status, although some of them would have been. Now, I do have an example here from Rome, which is also about the kind of relationship that we may sometimes see between those two categories of person, the trainers and personnel and the gladiators. And we have this small inscription from Rome to the shades of the dead, to Anicetus. I beg your pardon, that's a typo. There's a T left out of his name. Anicetus provocator, that's a type of gladiator, wielding a broad blade. He's the provocator spatarius. Well deserving, notice that, it's an absolutely standard epithet, benemerenti. Aelius Marcion, trainer and first-ranked combatant, erected this. So the trainer erected the epitaph to one of the gladiators, the provocator. And the trainer himself, the doctor, was also a gladiator because he says that he's primus, which would be short for primus paulus, which means first ranked, because there were several rankings of gladiators and he was one of the top rank, and that's no doubt why he qualified to be a trainer. So what we see there is a relationship that developed between the trainer and expert gladiator and this lesser expert, we must assume, provocator, whom he was training. So we start to get subsets of the kinds of relationships within the community of a gladiatorial barracks. Then I thought I would quickly give you a list of the kinds of terms that we meet in gladiatorial epigraphy. The way gladiators are referred to tells us something about the perspective of what they were up to. So they're called in Greek sunkelarios, which is a cellmate. So they were living in one of those 11-foot square rooms together. A sunoples, a fellow in arms. Okay, think of hoplite in Greek. Or a sunomelos, a companion. Okay, somebody who's companionable, who is a comes, really, in Latin, or a sodalis. Or in Latin, a coarmios, a fellow in arms, or a colibertus, fellow freedman, interesting one, or a contubernalis, a tent mate, convictor, a messmate, someone who breaks bread with you. And then the adversary could be a sun zygos, a yoke partner. Fascinating, I think, that one of the words for adversary, a gladiatorial opponent, is someone you're yoked together with. And that should give us pause. You're yoked together with your opponent. Or an antipalos, antidikos, antios. All of those words are much more transparent with the anti prefix. But the sun zygos, I think, is a really interesting one that we meet periodically for opponent in these gladiatorial inscriptions. So let's get back to a little bit of Greek and see what we can get out of it. This is an inscription, unfortunately very fragmentary, from Pamphylia in modern Turkey. Polynikes, great in reputation in combat with weapons. And he speaks in the first person. I was the first to inflict a fatal wound on my dear comrade Takinos. You would hardly expect to see I was the first to inflict a fatal wound and on my dear comrade in the same sentence. Okay, so etrosa, I ran him through. Okay, and he was my sunomelos. There's that word we just looked at the end of the second line of that fragment. So I was the first to inflict a fatal wound on my dear comrade Takinos. And that suggests, I think, the kind of fatalism of the gladiatorial barracks, that's what you were supposed to be doing. You were supposed to be fighting. And certain emperors, of course, forbade fighting to the death, but it could so happen that by mistake, maybe, one could go a little bit too far, and this could happen. So there's, I think, a kind of combination of fatalism and professionalism that must have kept these gladiators going. You may sometimes wish you could run a colleague through at a faculty meeting, but when it comes to the push, can you imagine fighting to the death against one of your colleagues, formally kitted out with weapons and so on? It would take, I think, a tremendous amount of distancing. And of course, some people will say, oh, but they wore helmets, and the helmets will have disguised their facial features. Well, you must know as well as I do exactly who is walking in front of you. If it's one of your colleagues, just from their walk, you can tell who they are. I'm sure that gladiators must have known one another's body language extremely well. They fought and practiced together all the time. So there's no way that a helmet could disguise who you were fighting against, I imagine. And so one of the paradoxes is to imagine them actually entering the arena to fight against somebody who they knew really, really well. Then there's this long inscription, which is actually in verse, from also Atalaya in Pamphylia. And I should here explain that because it's habitual in Greek epitaphs, but not in Latin ones, to append a poem, that's one of the reasons why we have so much more evidence from the Greek East than we do from the West about these gladiators. So this one says, look at beautiful Miletus, beautiful to look at, the fighter who won 8 times in the stadia. as beautiful as Adonis, son of Cinyras, when he was out hunting, or as the beautiful boy Hyrcantos, who was struck by a discus. Now fate has taken me by force from the ring and laid my body in the dear earth of Pamphylia. This marker my good friend Odysseus has set up here for me, for my tomb, in loving memory, to preserve my reputation. Doxes Christos. So Odysseus may be one of those speaking names and those professional names. They're very common from mythology for a fellow gladiator. And the one we're looking at is Miletus, perhaps called after the city, although that's not in Pamphylia. And so we see that there is a relationship here of loyalty and affection, which has caused the erection of the tombstone. But more than that, this pair of lines about the dear earth of Pamphylia, I think, is very interesting because it shows an attachment to place. And if we look carefully, we will see that there are other gladiatorial epitaphs which suggest that the gladiator's career can bring glory to his home town or his community. And that's the same with this verse epitaph for Euphrates, who came from Thessalonica. Having won 6 times, I brought glory to my fatherland. And again, one thinks of the World Cup, obviously, with brave little Cabo Verde bringing glory to the fatherland by being matched with Argentina in the first knockout round. But you can see there that there is a sense in which gladiators feel attached to a larger community. And I think that's very interesting, given that there's this general sense we get from the literary texts that they are completely beneath notice. And yet they feel they have a stake in their community. A few more examples. Oh, the top of my screen is not showing. I'm sorry. Do you have a horrible bar over the top of the screen that gets in the way? Oh, I can move it out of the way. Seneca, De Ira. Their skill protects gladiators, anger strips them naked. Something I think we should be thinking about is the degree of self-control that would have been required to meet in combat, people you knew pretty well. And you will see from the next text, this little Greek epitaph here about Stephanos, to be sure, I, who was once celebrated in the stadium, it's a Greek word for arena, have received oblivion, having killed my opponent who was full of irrational bitterness. My name is Stephanos. So being full of irrational bitterness, so pikria allogistos, that is a negative in a gladiator. And it's the subtext here, I think, is that the opponent, A, deserved to die and may have been so angry that he, wasn't in control of himself. Sorry.
Please exit the building through the Mass Ave door.
And maybe he made a mistake. Maybe he couldn't fight with the kind of self-control he should have used. But at any rate, Stephanus killed him.
Please exit the building through the Mass Ave door.
And we do have some interesting insights in some of these epitaphs as to how defeat and victory are characterized. And often defeat is obviously attributed to, fate, or sometimes a malevolent umpire, and sometimes bad training and so forth. But it's also the case, and we can see this from this little quote from Seneca's De Providentia, that gladiators did not relish being matched with anybody they considered to be an inferior partner. A gladiator judges it degrading to be matched with a lesser partner, and he knows that the gladiator is defeated ingloriously who is defeated without risk. So there's this sense in which it's all very well that you have an opponent who may put a foot wrong or is filled with bitterness, but you really want to be pitted against somebody who's a worthy opponent. And as I said earlier, there is a rating system, a ranking system for gladiators, this Palus system. And so they would not appreciate being pitted against somebody who was ranked as a lesser opponent. But by the same token, the gladiatorial graffiti from Pompeii show some remarkable records of complete rookies who defeat people who've been, crowned 12 times for a victory, or 14 times even. So obviously, Seneca is a philosopher, and he's pulling out of everyday life some lesson that he wants to make a philosophical point about. But I think as a general rule, we can assume that if somebody was proven to be of an inferior rank, you probably wouldn't want to be pitted against that person. So there is this professional drive that we see very prominently, I believe, in the gladiatorial arena, which must have, to some extent, shaped how the community saw itself. So let me move on. I do want to leave a little time at the end for questions, so let me just keep an eye on my watch here. Oh, now this has decided to stick. Oh, there we go. Okay, so another one from Caesarea Mazaca in Cappadocia. This is a pair of elegiac couplets. Look at these young men, revelers celebrating murderous Enyalios, lusty companions of grief-bringing Ares. If this is fame that many have been killed, look at Pelopius, outstanding among the dead. These are so hard to parse because we really have no context. But the companions of grief-bringing Ares are presumably gladiators, and Enyalios is presumably a very violent gladiator. The person who has died, Pelopius, one might assume would be a gladiator, but he could be actually a sponsor of the event. And the extent to which sponsors are critical to the sort of reputation of a gladiatorial troupe, I think is very interesting. And my next example, hopefully, will also shed light on this point. Here we are. In every respect, Tertullus's fame, something or other, that line is not extant in full, both because of his fine deeds and his distinguished ancestry, but still more now that he's laid low such an army of Ares-loving mortals in the stadia, and killed bears, panthers, and lions, counting his native city more precious than his own wealth. Together with Ares, Hermes also presided over the games with him, providing victory to the men who carry off the prizes. For this reason, emperors have given orders for letters to be written to him, and his virtues even surpass those of his ancestors. But even if its craftsmanship is proof that this stone is from Phrygia, this marker is deceptive. The stone comes from this land of ours. So Tertullus evidently is a sponsor of games, some sort of squire in his own community. This comes, if I move that little strip up there, comes from Sagalassus in Pisidia. He has laid low an army of Ares-loving mortals in the stadia. There's that same phrase again. In other words, he's put on scores of gladiators. And he's also had bears, panthers, and lions killed. The agency is given to him, but clearly he's not out there with a spear. He's getting these bears, panthers, and lions killed. So he's put on games with both gladiators and beasts, and he's counted his native city more precious than his own wealth. This is this remarkable kind of potlatch mentality in ancient spectacle that we find people really beggaring themselves, really spending huge amounts of their wealth on these ephemeral pleasures in the amphitheaters and stages of the Roman Empire. And there's Tertullus, who is boasting of having counted his own wealth as nothing against the pleasures that his native city would enjoy if he spent his money on their entertainment. And then Ares obviously is a sort of co-sponsor, if you like, of these games, but so is Hermes with the money bags, who supplies all the prizes to the participants. And the result of all this is that emperors have actually written to Tertullus to congratulate him on being such a benefactor to his native city. And as I'm sure you know, we have, particularly from the 2nd century CE, lots and lots of stone inscriptions on stone that record letters that different emperors wrote to various communities, congratulating them on, building a new aqueduct or putting on new games or something like that. And so it's a big, big deal to get a letter from the emperor. And cities, when they receive these letters, inscribe them in stone in the bulle so that everybody can see them, or in the agora. And Tertullus is making sure that we know that he got personal pat on the head from more than one emperor for his generosity. So you can see that putting on games consolidates the larger community as well, because they benefit from these spectacles, and the sponsors are really regarded with great gratitude, one must assume, from the community, particularly if they're putting on all these wild animals. I mean, that's pretty cool in the depths of Pisidia, I would think. Okay, well, let's move on, see how far we can get with this. Yeah, back to Quintilian for a minute. Many people think there must be a connection between gladiatorial combat and military combat, and the protagonist in the Declamatio Maio number 9 says what a shame it is that the gladiators' courage and fervor were not employed in the military, in the theatre of war, where real bravery is not circumscribed by rules of engagement. So this idea that you're really wasting your brawn and your brain fighting as entertainment when you could be defending the empire. And one wonders whether the average Roman looking at the games had any sense like that, or whether they saw a sharp division between combat as an entertainment and combat in the far distant provinces where people had to defend the limes and so forth. Nowadays, people say, well, the games have the effect of making the community aware of sort of the necessity to fight, and it sort of, kind of supports people's, beefs up people's kind of militancy. Other people say, well, it has the opposite effect, that if you watch this violent combat, you get all this out of your system, and then you go home and help your wife to do the washing up. I mean, we just don't know which way it worked. But it is interesting that the Declamatio Maio number 9 does make this point that in some ways this fighting skill is kind of wasted as a form of entertainment when there's real fighting to be done, when it really matters. So thinking of the even larger community, what does the whole public think about gladiatorial combat? Does that have the effect of being a glue that sort of glues the community together, or is it completely divisive? That's another way to think about this idea of whether community and solidarity are generated by gladiatorial combat or not. And then I wanted to think briefly about mercy, and whether, in fact, we should think of mercy as in any way a quality that is, if you like, exemplified in the arena. And again, our declamation makes the point that even gladiators spare the defeated. They don't always, of course. If they fall really poorly, they may lose their life. But by and large, gladiators who've been defeated are spared for a very practical reason. And here is a key text, a legal text from the 2nd century. And poor old Gaius is trying to explain the difference between hire and purchase. And he gives an example from the gladiatorial combat. Likewise, if I've handed gladiators over to you on the basis that in the case of those who leave the arena alive, the sum of 20 denarii will be paid to me for their performance, whereas in the case of those who are killed or maimed, the sum will be 1,000 denarii, then the question is it a contract of purchase and sale that has been entered into, or one of hiring and leasing? So basically, it's damaged goods. If you break it, you pay for it. If you kill one of my gladiators, it's expensive. If he just gets a few nicks and scratches, it's a rental fee. And so we see that, in fact, there is a very mercenary streak here, that gladiators are a capital investment. And so the strong incentive to exercise what we might like to think of as mercy, which is really a way of saving your capital investment. So let's see that in practice. This is a nice one, set up in the small letters at the bottom by Sebastiane for Autolycos as a memorial. And then it tells you if anybody messes with this monument, he will pay a fine of 2,500 denarii, and that's quite a large fine. So what the text says is, you marvel perhaps, dear passerby, that I, Autolycos, have died. I had the upper hand and wanted to save my opponent. In the moment of victory, I died contrary to fate. Now, we don't know what went wrong. Autolycus thought he was winning, and at that very moment, somehow or other, I don't know if he lost his footing or what happened, but he did, in fact, lose his life. But the word I've bolded there in the Greek and in the translation is the word save. Because sozo can mean to save money, to put money in your piggy bank. And so it looks on the face of it as though he wanted to exercise mercy. But was he actually wanting to preserve the opponent's life, because that's what you had to do, because these people were precious? And there are several instances in which this verb sozo occurs. Here's another one. You do not look upon the Locrian Ajax, nor on the other hand the Telamonian, but the one who gave pleasure in the stadia in warlike battles. This is a guy called Ajax, who isn't one of the mythological Ajaxes. He's actually a gladiator Ajax. And he gave great pleasure in the stadia in warlike battles, having bravely saved many souls while under great pressure. It's not quite clear what krateros hypanankein means, hoping that someone would grant the same to me. Evidently didn't work, since this is his epitaph. But it's that same word, sozo, sozanta there in the bold, having bravely saved many souls. Or here, and this is from Thessaly, passerby, you look upon me, brave Olympus, who has often snatched victory in the stadia, and in the stadia saved many men when fate desired it. And in the stadia saved many men. When fate desired it, I paid my debt to destiny here, fighting for the 9th time. Hail, passerby, citizen of the Troad. Panthea to Olympus from her own resources for the sake of his memory. I find this one actually very moving. He had apparently saved lives, so he hadn't killed his opponents, but he'd won 8 times. And then he says his number came up when fate desired it. Ethele Moira, that should be an M, not a P, not a mu, not a pi, sorry, Moira, not Poira. When fate desired it, I paid my debt to destiny here, fighting for the 9th time. So in his 9th fight, he died. And it's in the first person, but actually it's been put up by Panthea, presumably his wife, from her own resources. And then I find this Mneas Charin so moving for the sake of his memory. And it worked. I mean, here we are reading it now. So it worked. This is 1800 years old, and we're reading it now, and we're remembering him. And so one sees in these gladiatorial epitaphs no sense that gladiators have no sense of self-worth. Obviously, the epitaphs have been composed by their survivors, but there's no shame to the gladiatorial profession. They have behaved honorably, like Olympus, who saved many men. And then his number came up. He died. And so that we remember him, Panthea, from her own resources, paid for this stone. One gets, I think, a completely different sense of gladiatorial combat by reading these things. This is not to say that it isn't a barbaric practice. We wouldn't want to have gladiators today, but one gets a sense of how they were valued in their amongst themselves, I think, from these texts. Okay, so we need to draw this to a close. So let's just quickly go to Rome. And here you have the Plastico, the big model, which is in the Museo della Civiltà Romana, down at Eur, the Esposizione Universale Roma, which was built by Mussolini for the big world exhibition, which never happened because the Second World War occurred instead. And of course, that museum is almost always closed. But I've seen the Plastico. I'm probably one of the very few people on the planet who've seen it. And there you see the Colosseum. And if you look carefully, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, that you can see that there next door to it, there's a teeny little arena, okay? And that is the Ludus Magnus. And this is the Ludus Magnus. That's the Piazza del Colosseo. So the Colosseum's over here on the left. And the Ludus Magnus in bold is the part that has been exposed when they took down the 19th century block here to expose the remains of the training school. And then the part that is in fainter script, so to speak, is the part that's still underneath the block that's here. So this is what we see today. You have a training arena in the middle, and then you have the substructures of the seating. So they did practice in front of spectators. And in the background, you can see those little cells. And guess what? They're 11 feet by 11 feet, just like the little rooms in Pompeii. And in the background, the Colosseum. And there is, as you've probably seen in the news, a tunnel between this structure and the Colosseum that has recently been opened to the public. And of course, I'm longing to get in there and see what's what in that tunnel. Okay, so they could live and practice in a sort of mini arena space right next to the real thing. And we must imagine, I think, here's another view of it, not quite so dark. Training arena on the right, cells on the left. I think we must imagine that this epitaph that's coming up here is about somebody who probably was barracked in that structure. To the shades of the dead, to well-deserving Macedon, novice Thracian gladiator of Alexandrian extraction, the whole troop of Thracian gladiators raised this monument. He lived 20 years, 8 months, 12 days. Usually it's children who are commemorated down to the last day, in a couple of cases down to the last hour. But this person was obviously young to die as a gladiator. And it's interesting that he was fought in the Thracian style. And so the troop of Thracian gladiators raised this monument. He was a novice. He'd never fought in public. He was a tiro. And they must have paid into a burial society and felt this sense of solidarity with their lost comrade who never had a chance to fight in public. The next one, I'm only going to give you on the stone so you can practice reading it. The stone broke down the middle but don't let that put you off. Julius Valerianus, B for V in late antiquity. So Julius Valerianus, qui vixit, annis, be for bene, and then viginti, you see the XX. Natalis, Natali, there's an L hiding under the crack, suo, D for decessit. Sola diciarius, bonus amoratus, filetius usque at forza. So what's going on here? Julius Valerianus, qui vixit annis bene viginti, natali suo decessit, soda liciarius bonus amoratus, filetius usque at forzam. Okay, so very interesting. The Mason left out the S of usque and sort of sneaked it in at the top. And then forzam is fossam, the accusative after ad, which becomes at here in front of the F of fossam. And the dissimilation of that double S, which you see in late antiquity, becomes fotzam. And the M, of course, is not pronounced. So who is this person and what's happened here? Julius Valerianus, who lived life well for 20 years, died on his birthday, Natali Suo, a good member of the troop, beloved, affectionate, all the way to the ditch. And the ditch, of course, is slang for the grave. What interests me here is that this guy died on his birthday. Now, what are the chances? Well, if you were a Christian, the day of your death was the day of your rebirth into the life of Christ. So it is possible that what we have here is a sort of closet Christian. Christians were not supposed to fight as gladiators, but you can imagine that one way the community spirit of the gladiatorial barracks could be very effective would be if a message of Christianity or Mithraism or whatever kind of caught on in the barracks. So it is possible that what we see here is a proto-Christian who is being commemorated on his birthday, meaning that on the day in which he was received into heaven by Christ. And one clue to that is the D for decessit, which you never see on pagan inscriptions. It's always Christian inscriptions which have the D for he died, decessit. So I don't know, but I mean, it would be fun if that was the case. And he must have been a retiarius, judging from this rather crude sketch here. See his trident and his net and his shoulder protector. And he's won a victory. There's a palm frond, whether it's a victory in the arena or whether it's the victory of the afterlife, I leave to your imagination. Okay, so to the shades of the dead of Vitalis, this is at Parma in North Italy, Retiarius, unbeaten, Batavian by origin, because of his bravery he fought to a draw, or he fought to the death, it's not clear, with his adversary. He was a spirited fighter. His barrack mate Hymen, and then it fades out, unfortunately. But it appears here that we've got somebody originally from the Netherlands who was never beaten in the arena, but apparently suffered the same fate as his opponent. And the reason I've shown you this is because there is a sense here that he has been celebrated for his bravery. You see the Latin sua virtute. So that the gladiator, Cicero tells us, gladiators at least have a chance to display bravery. And here is an example in an inscription where their bravery, their virtus, their manly physical courage is being celebrated. So that also must have been an impetus, if you like, in the barracks. And then this is Constantius, sponsor to his gladiators because of the success of the show. He was so pleased that 2 of his gladiators fell at once. The wand killed them both. In other words, the umpire overseeing the the combat somehow made some sort of judgment that ultimately resulted in their death, and the power shelters each of them. And then the wife of one of them has been a sort of co-sponsor of the inscription, of the epitaph. But it is interesting that we see this kind of rank calculation, the calculus of reputation and fame coming from the sponsor. He was so pleased about this that he commemorated them, because it brought him favor muneris, the favor of the show. So one doesn't want to be too starry-eyed about what motivates people to put on gladiatorial combat in the ancient world. And then there's one here which shows you the kind of kudos that you can get. You get a statue in your marketplace if you've put on something really special in your community. But why I'm showing you this is because he has, this fellow Severus, has put on these games cum familia gladiatoria Arianorum, with the troop of gladiators belonging to the Arii, and they are a very prominent family in South Italy. And so it's absolutely clear that they must have fought each other. They're the one troop of gladiators who are mentioned in this inscription. So they must have been fighting in pairs, the people who had fought and lived together and practiced together. And then back to our declamation, circling back for the end of this. Isn't it enough that by daily practice for combat for so long I learned how to die, that matched with my opponent, armed and led into the arena, I would have died had I been a better friend. This is the rich man's son lamenting the fact that he was replaced by his buddy, who then died. So you see, there's very much the idea there that your opponents are the people that you've been practicing with. And to end with, a new discovery just over 10 years ago. At Carnuntum in Austria, where there's this big civilian amphitheater, there's also a little watercourse running along the bottom of the slide. You can't see it here. And with ground-penetrating radar, they found the barracks. They were sure it would be next to the watercourse. It's all written up by Wolfgang Neubauer in Antiquity. And this is what they found. They didn't dig at all until they had mapped it in their ground-penetrating radar. There's this long path in pale blue here, leading to the door, and it's all completely enclosed, no external entrances except for this one. Inside, there are 2 training arenas, and then they found the refectory, they found the cells, they found the administrative quarters. The only thing they haven't found is a latrine. Everything else they found. And so they know where the gladiators who were fighting in this arena actually trained and lived, in that tiny space right next to their performance area. And today all you see is this little hump as you approach this site. That is the amphitheater. It looks so idyllic in its green, grassy mound, but there were people living and dying on the other side of that space. Which brings us back to where we began. I hope I've complicated things for you. If I've done anything in the last hour, I hope I've complicated the idea that the gladiatorial barracks are a communal space. And now I see I have not left any time for questions, but maybe we can fit in a couple. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for another great talk. Let's go Charlie, then John.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Hi, Charlie.
It's very easy to see why every year people want you to be at the Summer Institute. This is a question that I have for you regarding the way many people get their education about gladiators, going all the way back to more than a century ago to the silent film era, and then to films like Quo Vadis and Spartacus and, most recently, Gladiator.
Mm.
Is it your sense that Hollywood has gotten a lot of it wrong about gladiators? Because I'm
They
sure you
got, yeah. Well, they have. They got a lot of it wrong. I was the consultant for the first Gladiator movie and was sort of very distressed by so many things that they didn't ask me about and got wrong. But I do think that they got the sense of camaraderie in the gladiatorial training school right. I thought that was very well done, actually. That I thought was close to what I've been trying to sort of pull out of these inscriptions for you. But then when it comes to things like bread and circuses, I cringed when I saw them throwing those loaves among the spectators. Stuff like that is just maddening. And I wrote something about this. I would love somebody to hire a consultant on a retainer so they didn't have to teach their students or anything like that and just get it all right. It would, the trouble is, of course, the public get brought up on it being wrong. So one of the things, I only read the script for Gladiator. I read it 3 times. I didn't 3 different iterations. I wasn't on the set, although they phoned me from the set from time to time, asked me questions. And so quite gratuitously, I said to them, by the way, if you're thinking of having those leather wristbands on the gladiators, they didn't wear them. They do wear them in the movie. Why? Because Cecil B. DeMille put them on his gladiators and soldiers. And so, they thought, oh, well, the public was saying, this is a crappy movie. They didn't even have those wristbands. So, you're fighting a losing battle trying to get them to do it right. But I made one lifelong friend out of the main script writer, and anything's worth it in life if you make a friend. He actually wrote to me for the 4th of July. I thought that was next question.
John was next.
You're talking about me or
Yeah. Hi,
Judy?
John. Hi, John.
Hi, good to see you.
Likewise.
I don't have much of a question, not a very big question, but I wonder, did you have any sort of thought about gladiators and solidarity and so on when you're thinking about the mixed martial arts in the People's House on the 14th of June? Um, did you feel any sort of connection between that spectacle and the gladiatorial games?
Was that the cage fight you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, I would like to think that gladiatorial combat was less nakedly sort of brutal and animalistic than that. It's interesting to think about how the emperor factors into all of this. I find of great interest, actually, all these little people who put on games all around the periphery of the empire. But when you look at what happens in the arena itself, we have so many different sort of perspectives on this. Julius Caesar apparently really riled the population because he took the equivalent of his laptop with him and just worked at the arena. And they hated that because he wasn't sharing, their popular ambitions. Augustus, of course, who was a master at propaganda, sat there and really, was part of it. So was Titus. Titus especially followed a particular gladiatorial team. Some emperors like Commodus actually performed in the arena, but under special circumstances, they couldn't possibly lose their lives. So clearly the arena was a space where emperors needed to cultivate popularity. And whether there were enough people in antiquity who found this sort of despicable, as so many people did at the spectacle on the 14th of June, I don't know. Senators were supposed to attend, and so were all the different categories of Roman society. So it's really hard to know quite how the empress played this one and how it played with the public. How far people got sucked into it. These things, if you've been watching the World Cup, one gets absorbed in it. It's so interesting to see what the human physique and the brain together can do. So there is a book by Garrett Fagan, who unfortunately died of cancer very young, called The Lure of the Arena, where he interprets it in terms of modern sports psychology. It's us versus them. The fact that they're all slaves, I think, is really important. And that makes it very, very transversive. What's the word I'm looking for? Subversive. When Commodus, who's the emperor, fights, does the equivalent of a slave. So you really see all sorts of things being upended. Sorry, long answer. I'll be quiet now.
Let's go Elizabeth and then Amanda.
Not so much a question, but they're actually working in the Ludus Magnus now. I don't know if you know that, but it's entirely covered all the way around, and it has this plastic sheathing. Some people have torn holes in spaces so you can just peer through. I don't know what so they're doing something with it right now. I just thought I'd mention that.
That's great news. Hope they find something. Thank you. I'll go and peer through one of those holes next time I'm in Rome.
Yeah, that was a great talk. I really enjoyed it, Kathleen. The thing that struck me was you had several inscriptions that had been set up by the gladiator's wife, and we don't really think of the gladiators as having. I mean, I'm sort of wondering what you know about how that quite worked. Should we take from that the gladiators were in barracks only sort of when they were revving up and getting ready for a particular games, and the rest of the time they had effectively private lives, even though they were enslaved?
Yeah, very difficult to know, actually. And sometimes it's a gladiator's wife and a child who together are responsible for the monument. I just don't know the answer to that. One can imagine that maybe they weren't always enclosed in these spaces. Maybe they had a degree of freedom. Maybe they could live down the street with their family. We just don't know. Unfortunately, it was what's the name of that person who did all those engravings in the 18th century? He did an engraving of
Piranesi?
Piranesi.
Yes, right. Thank you, Piranesi. He did an engraving of one of the rooms in Pompeii, where he installed, completely out of his imagination, ankle shackles and skeletons attached to these. That was actually not the case, apparently. So, people have this idea that they were always enclosed in these spaces. And I gave you that sense too in my talk. But I'm glad you've asked this question, because it does raise the issue that maybe they weren't always tucked up in these spaces. And because, you got presumably a decent diet and all that kind of thing, maybe being a gladiator wasn't, in terms of ancient life, the very, very worst fate you could have. I wish we could face the fact that people died on the street in antiquity like they don't anymore today. They must have done. Life must have been so brutal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amanda?
Hi, I really enjoyed it. I was so struck by the word yoke fellow that you showed, and maybe your second slide or something. And I was and that really just settled into my heart. Paul, in the book of Philippians, chapter 4, he uses that same word as for his ministry partner, which is very uncertain who this loyal yoke fellow is. Could be his wife, some argue, no one knows. But I'm just saying what an intimate term
Mm.
that is, and Philippians is a source contemporary with what you're reading, your inscriptions, and oftentimes translations of Philippians will just say the name like Cyzicus or something, not call it maybe this person's name, but I don't know about that. But anyway, I just would putting that out for everyone, just to give some highlight on just what an intimate term that is.
Yeah.
That's so much more than roommate,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Mm. Thank you. I should actually explore the New Testament a bit, or the language of the New Testament, try and kind of calibrate some of these terms. It's a good idea.
Shirley?
I was just curious about the fact that the gladiators within one squad of gladiators would be paired against each other. I just, I guess, misunderstood the fact that I thought that there were various groups or teams of gladiators and that they would play each other the way teams play today. Um, did that not really happen, or?
Not as far as we can tell. Where we have any indication of where the gladiators came from, it's from a single troop. And I agree, it's completely sort of counterintuitive. But apparently that's what you did. You rented somebody's troop of gladiators and they paired off according to their styles. Because as you know, certain styles fought other styles. The Murmillo fought the Thrakes and that kind of thing.
Right. But so they wouldn't rent two troops. It would be too expensive.
That expense might have come into it, and availability also would come into it. We just don't have any evidence. This is the problem. And I'm one of these people who clings like a limpet to the evidence. And so I'm missing things probably because I'm not prepared to imagine it differently. But there's no evidence known to me, I should say known to me, doesn't mean to say it's not out there, other people know it, of more than one troop being rented for the same occasion.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this wonderful talk. It's so good to see you again.
Likewise, Philip.
Sally?
Okay. Hello, Kathleen. Thank
Hi,
you
Sally.
again. Yep. One of the thoughts, I really liked the phrase out of context here, pugnandi lege praescribitur, and especially lately with whatever happened with our American team and Trump. But I've been coaching crew in addition to teaching Latin and Greek for most of my career, and the idea of being yoked together to me makes sense. And I also played basketball when I was a high school student. And this idea that you would be yoked together brings out the best in each of you. And if they were owned and they were going to compete, they would know each other's moves and they might be able to keep each other safe rather than kill each other. Just a little wound, a flesh wound. And I wondered if that might be the reason for that word. But playing by the rules, again, it just reminds me so much of all of the sports that we have, these big beat 'em up, kill each other sports like football and boxing and everything. And if you don't play correctly, you really do damage someone. So the relevance to this.
Totally. And as you're probably aware, about 20 years ago in Ephesus, the Austrian team excavating there found our first gladiatorial graveyard. And these skeletons are full of healed wounds. And then some unhealed wounds, which are the ones that must have killed them. So they had enough knowledge that these wounds, not just flesh wounds, but wounds even down to the bone, could be healed. I suppose they knew to keep them clean or something. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There must have been wounds you knew you could inflict if you had to without causing mortal damage. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Professor Coleman? Well, thank you so much again for another amazing talk here at the Kane Summer Institute. And like you, I hope we can try to do something in person next year. Um, so this is a wrap for CSI 2026. In looking at community this year, of course, the Summer Institute is one form of community that we have. Some of us have been here since Brown, some even back to Dartmouth. Um, but it's also a community that is known for its ANIA, how it welcomes everyone equally without regard to status. Whether you're a professor, high school teacher, retiree, just lifelong learner. And I think it's one thing that sets CSI and Kane apart from other organizations in America. But yet still, as I said last year, we're still in a bit of transition. I would like to think that we will hopefully have a long-term home at Boston College High School in Dorchester. And the hope is that we can really try to make that happen next year with the ACL being right next door at UMass Boston, and also when the dorms are not being repaired because of flood damage. Optimally, we'd like to continue to offer these dual tracks, but I know that many of us, as Professor Coleman mentioned, miss that in-person interaction and community. So just as a couple of quick housekeeping things, I can't speak too much about future themes because it will be a new director. This is the end of my time. But I will be sending out an evaluation form in the next day or so, and we'll be taking that feedback into consideration as we think about what next year will look like, and I will pass that on to my successor. Also, if anybody needs forms about PDPs, please let me know, and I will get those forms to you. And so I want to close by thanking all of you for participating in the Institute this year, even with some of our challenges going online. This is, again, a community that I'm honored to be a part of and humbled that you guys have asked me to run this for the past couple of years. I hope the Institute this year and last year has given you all much to think about and ponder over. I know I have a lot of things from the Latin teacher workshop. I'm really excited to try next year. And I hope to see all of you again next July, where I will be an eager participant like all of you, excited to see what the next director has come up with. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great night and a great rest of your summer.
And thank you, Mark, for what you did. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you,
Thanks, Kathleen.